Hey everybody, welcome back to Watch and Carry. So in today's video, we're going to be doing another Hydromod on a Casio watch. I've done one of these Hydromods before. It was on a Casio Duro watch. You can look back at that video. It has a blue analog quartz movement. And that one turned out pretty well. Needed a little bit more frequent of a battery change due to the fluid resistance, but it was keeping accurate time and really loved that modification. So I posted that on the custom Casio Facebook group, and one person reached out and said, "Hey, you might want to go ahead and try that same mod, but on a digital watch." And I said, "Yeah, let's go ahead and try that." He said it's a little bit easier to do that mod on the digital, a lot quicker, and you don't have to worry so much about the battery wearing down on a digital watch compared to an analog watch because there's no moving parts. So, with a Hydromod, you're putting liquid into the watch. If you have liquid in there and you have moving hands, obviously that's more fluid resistance for those hands to work against. So the battery's going to die down. And he says with a digital watch, you have nothing moving. You can get a really cool effect, and it's pretty easy to do. So I went ahead and got one of these, factory Casio AE1200s. This is also called the Casio Royale. And I had this just lying in my box. I've been trying to think about what modification to do to this, and I thought, this will be perfect. Let's go ahead and take some of my other spare parts. So I have here an AE1300-1av masking and module, and it's already been modified with a negative display. So I've converted that. If you want to know how to make a negative display, you can look at some of my other videos for that. We're going to put that inside here and then fill this with liquid. So why am I putting a negative display in here? So I was talking with some of these other people who've done the Casio World Time Hydromods, and they said when you have a positive display like this, meaning you have that gray or white background with the black characters, and you do the Hydromod, you don't really notice too much of a difference. So that means the numerals, the indices will pretty much look the same. They said the biggest thing you will notice, though, is that with this particular watch, the text around this divided piece of plastic, which is called a masking, the text actually gets much crisper and much more clear to read because the white text is printed on a black background. But as for the numerals inside these windows, they said that looks pretty much the same. You don't really notice too much of a difference there. So they said if you want to notice a big visual difference, you want to do this on a black background. So that's why we're going to be converting it to a negative display. So I'm actually wearing a Hydromodded one. I've done this project already on this particular watch just to make sure I know what I'm doing before showing it to you guys. And actually, I've done it on two other watches as well. I think I'm going to show you this one actually because the yellow pops. So this is Hydromodded, and you can just see how black the negative display is compared to, let's take out this module here, which still looks pretty good, but I don't know if it's going to show it on camera. Let's bring this a little bit here. There you go. So the first thing let's look at is the black background, the negative display filter. You may not see it on camera, but in person, this is much darker shade of black. And it's almost like a shiny black, like a glossy black because, well, there's a liquid inside of there, so it's going to have that glossy effect. The numerals look just a hair crisper and just a little bit more brighter in terms of that goldish yellow color. Again, it may not be picking that on camera. One thing you can notice on camera, because I'm looking through my viewfinder right now, is if you look at this text right here, the countdown timer, notice how the light really reflects off of it, so you have a little bit of a glare. It's not as crisp. And then look at the word Casio, also has a little bit of a glare here, and it's not as crisp on this side. But here, really, really crisp, nice contrast just because of that liquid. So that's the big difference there. If I go ahead and turn it this way, the viewing angles are pretty much the same. The time is going to be, near impossible to read as you turn it up. So that's not really going to be affected. The Casio and the yellow looks just a little bit more clear on the right side. Okay, if we turn it to the side, Can't really read the time. So really just the big effect here, crisper numerals, blacker blacks, and then that text on the masking is going to look a lot more, have a lot more contrast. So that's the difference there. We're basically going to be doing this exact mod, but now we're going to be doing it on this watch just so you guys know how to do it at home. So we'll set that watch to the side. A few tools you're going to need. So going from right to left, you can see here I have a air blaster. This is just to kind of blast out any dust from the case before we put in our liquid. I have this syringe here. This is just going to help top off some of the oil. Spring bar tool to remove the bracelet. And then you're going to need your oil. Now, when it comes to oil, you want to get 100% silicone oil. You don't want to be using mineral oil or anything else. The reason being, silicone oil does not eat at rubber or plastic parts, which is what this watch is mostly composed of on the inside. And then when it comes to the grade or the viscosity, you get 100% silicone oil, and then you go to viscosity. So if you look on Amazon, you can see things like 100 CST, 200 CST, 50 CST. CST, as far as my understanding goes, is a unit of measurement for how viscous the fluid is. And I think the higher the CST, the more thick the fluid is. So why does that matter? Well, for a digital watch, I've heard from other people who have done way more of these mods than me, it doesn't really matter if you're using 50 or 10 or 100 or 200 CST on a digital watch, because no matter how thick the fluid is, there's nothing moving inside of a digital watch against that fluid. We don't have to worry about fluid resistance. We don't have to worry about how viscous and thick that fluid is because there's no moving parts. So as far as our project today is concerned, I could just use whatever I have available. Probably best to use the cheapest that's available, because I think as you go lower, like 10 or 20 CST, at least on my shopping on Amazon, those are really hard to find. And when I do find them, they are way more expensive than this. This was about 12 bucks, and I think the 10 CST was like 60. So just use the cheapest 100% silicone oil you can find. Now, if you're talking about like my other video where you have a watch that has moving parts like this Casio Duro, this is not hydromodded, but this is just to show you that we have moving parts. Then you have to start worrying about that CST number. Again, with this, you're going to want to use 100% silicone, but you're going to want to go, ideally less than 50. So I probably wouldn't want to use this fluid on this just because it's going to make battery changes more frequent, and it's just going to cause more resistance for those gears and the mechanism to move around. Right, so we got that, and then we're going to be having this clear container. I'm going to try to find out where I bought this. I think it was on Amazon. And we're going to be filling up our oil. So putting our watch inside this and filling this up with oil in here. So that way, if we have any spillover, we can go ahead and use our syringe, get up the extra, and use that to put back in the watch. Just because this oil is not really cheap, we don't want to waste any. And then I'm working on top of this, water absorbent pad. This is actually for my dog. So this is, just like a chuck. You can just work on a towel. You can work on a wooden table if you want, but just know that unless you're working on something like this, oil is probably going to spill out. So let's go ahead and get started here. We'll set this stuff off to the side, and we will remove our bracelet first. This chuck is pretty abrasive on the top, so I don't want to rest this really fragile glass here. So I'm going to turn this over and get access to that spring bar. Okay, so just watch out, that spring is going to shoot out. Put your spring bar tool in here and pry from top to bottom and slowly drag it out like that, and then you can remove the rest of it like so. Go ahead and save these. These are 18 millimeters, by the way, so if you lose them, you'll have to buy a spring bar kit and just get an 18 millimeter spring bar from there. Okay, let's take our micro screwdriver, remove these 4 screws in the back. So while I'm doing this, other things besides the look benefits to hydromodding, well, just know that this is going to void your warranty. I have had people comment saying, don't you know that this is going to void your warranty? I would hope that common sense tells you that somebody knows that already. I shouldn't have to say that. You are modifying a watch. Obviously, Casio did not intend you to buy silicone fluid and fill it inside your watch. So yes, you are going to void your warranty. But, For some of us, that's okay. You know, you can do with your watch what you want. You've bought it. These are cheaper to work on. This is not like a super rare Casio. So for me, I thought this would just be a fun project. Number two, a other side benefit, which I don't really do this for it, but some people have said this is the reason why they do it to their watches, is it increases, adding silicone oil increases the water resistance rating on a watch. The reason being that if you have a watch filled with air and water somehow gets in there, either through the case back or through one of the pushers, then obviously you have water damage. But if you have a case that's filled with oil, oil repels water, and so there's a better chance of protecting your internals from water if you have oil inside of it. So I've never tried that. I've had some people on that custom Facebook Casio group tell me it works. So, you know, you can do what you want with that. My personal feeling is if you're going to buy a watch specifically for an aquatic sport, that you might as well just buy the proper watch that was made from the factory with that rating to begin with. So just my 2 cents. So we have this O-ring here. Just be very delicate here. Don't use anything sharp. And then that O-ring, we're going to take note of this, that you can see here at the top. We have this little notch here. So that's the 12 o'clock position. So just know it does matter which way you put this O-ring back. Take our spring bar tool again. And then this is the module now I'm lifting up, and we'll take that off right there. And go ahead and try to minimize touching that. So I touched it a little bit there on the top. So set this to the side, just gently wipe my fingerprints. And then I'm going to give this a light blasting with the air blaster just to get any dust off, because we don't want any dust floating in our liquid. Okay, and then take this, put our case back here so that dust doesn't go in there. And let's go ahead and swap out modules here. Oh, and the masking. So we got to take out the masking from this guy too. So take your tool, lift up. Be careful not to touch the inside of the glass. Another way you can do this is you can just, that's inside, you can just flip it over and just lightly tap with your fingertips, not your nail, because this glass is really fragile, like that, and it'll just pop out. So save this guy for another project. Okay, all right, so module to the side, and let's go ahead and grab our clean plastic case. So that will be this. Okay, now we're going to take our watch, or our case now, we're going to take our air blaster and just kind of blast from top to bottom. Look in the light to see if there's any dust in there. We want to get that all out before we do our Hydromod. So we'll put that there. And then I'm going to take my case here. Now this is brand new, but I just want to make sure I'm going to give this a blaster there too. Just make sure there's no debris in here. And set that guy to the side. All right. So with our case here, we're going to flip this over like so. And then you're going to take your oil, and you know, this is a pretty big cavity that we're going to be filling, so we don't need to use the syringe right now. The syringe also has the potential to introduce air bubbles, so you really just want to use that at the very end to top off. So I'm just going to dip this here, or pour this here. And you want to fill it all the way till you get to the brim, especially if you're working with this plastic case around the case of the watch. You don't have to worry so much about leaks or about wasting oil. So that looks pretty good right there. Okay. Then I'm going to take my syringe. This tip is clean. I'm going to look for any air bubbles that might be here in the oil. And let's go ahead and get those taken care of already. So fortunately, I don't see any. If you see any, just go ahead and lightly tap it with the tip of your syringe. And then that will pop the air bubble off. All right. Now we'll go ahead and just close this really quick. We'll take our masking. I'm going to give this a blast here, as well as here. Go ahead and check that to make sure there's no debris. So it looks good. Okay, now with your case, just remember, I should have mentioned this before, which is your 12 o'clock and 6 o'clock, because obviously the 3 circles should go to the 12. So you can just lift up on your case and just double check where the 12 and the 6 are on the World Time and the Illuminator printings, or just remember before you put that in. Okay, now that we've got that sorted out, let's open this up again. Okay, yep, I'm going to top this off just a little bit more. There we go. Again, we're going to check for any air bubbles. Okay, let's go ahead and slide the masking in. I kind of like to slide it in at an angle so it's pushing air from one side to the other, like so. Take my syringe here to make sure there's clean. I'll blast that with air. And I'm just going to go ahead and like tap, let's get some brightness up here. I'm going to tap over here on one side and then roll this to the other. Okay, like so. All right, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to lightly tip the 12 o'clock part of the case this way. So the watch case will kind of angle itself up a little bit like so. So I'm just going to dip it up. Whoop, that was too much. Okay, just a little bit like that. And that's just to force any air bubbles from that might be trapped in the masking towards one side. All right, so now that that's there, let me top this off again. Look for any air bubbles. Pop them if you see any. Just about at the end of this bottle. Okay. All right, that looks pretty good. Oh, and I can take this microfiber towel away because this one I do not want to get wet with silicone oil. Then we're going to take our module here. Let's go ahead and close this. We're going to give this a blast to get any dust that's on there, as well as the back. Okay, and then we will go ahead and put this in to match with the cutouts on the masking. There we go. All right. Now you're going to take your spring bar tool. It's going to get a little wet here. You're going to kind of move these tabs. So you 1 tab, 2, 3, and 4. Kind of push them inward towards the center and at the same time put a little pressure on top of the battery. Because right now this is not sitting flush because those tabs are resting on the internal stems of those pushers. So you kind of like that. And you'll notice some oil kind of squeezing out the sides. Go. I do want to say that one thing you also have to be aware of is if you're not working, well, even if you're working with this watch, you see how you have these pushers. Pushers are just another word for buttons. So these are the pushers here, 1, 2, 3, and 4, right? So as you push them in, usually, especially with this watch, they spring back out because there's actually a spring inside the stem of them. And they spring back to the outside of the watch so that way it's ready to be used again. With some watches, the springs don't work or they're missing, or sometimes just by design, these buttons don't push themselves out automatically. So if you're having a hard time resting this module inside the case, you might actually have to push from the inside out on the stem of those pushers to all of them and then put the module in. So just one thing to be aware of there. Okay, so that's in. Now I'm just going to push inward on all these tabs just to make sure that they're sitting right behind the stems of their pushers, and that way when I push that button it will work. There we go. So that's good. Okay, now we've pretty much done that. You have a little bit of a cavity here on the case back, if you can see. See how there's a little bit of a shallow bowl? So that's going to be a nice pocket for air to be trapped in when you secure the case back. So as much as you can, you really want to top off the oil that's spilled, or if you have extra, all around the back side of this module. So that way when you put the case back on, there's as little air in there as possible. I think it's near impossible to get all the air out just because this cavity, there's really no way, I think, to get this on and then put in oil. If you know, let me know. So what I'm going to do is just have that case back ready, and then I'm just going to take my syringe here, and I'm going to aspirate some of that extra fluid that fell to the side. So actually, let me take this watch out first because I have to tip this over like that. Okay, so I'm going to tip this to the side, and then I'm going to aspirate here. Try to first make sure that you don't have any air in your syringe, and just aspirate slowly. Okay, there we go. Okay, put this back in, and then we're going to slowly inject. You know, especially if you're using a very thin needle, it's going to create air bubbles. So I'm really just injecting very slowly. You can see the bubbles kind of hitting the top of that battery case, but they kind of pop because I'm going slow. So there you go. And then you'll see the oil start to spill out the sides. So once it does that, you kind of know you've reached the top already, right? You filled it as much as you can. Going to take our O-ring here. Remember, we're going to look for that 12 o'clock notch. You can see it right there. It's very small, but that's got to go to the 12 o'clock position. Okay, now there's a little trough for that O-ring to sit inside of. So just make sure it's in that trough. I'm going to take my syringe again, just top it off again, just a little bit. Okay, now when I put this case back on, the fluid is going to be pressed by the case, and sometimes that fluid is enough to shift that O-ring off of its track. So you just keep an eye on your O-ring to make sure that it's still, you know, sitting where it needs to. Hands are very slippery, so I'm going to be using tweezers here. Okay, I'm going to put just a little bit more oil here, so I'm just resting it at an angle here. Go, and then just going to slide this out carefully and then close and then push down with one of my fingers and keep the pressure there. Okay, now I'm going to look around the perimeter between the case back, which is what my finger's touching, and the case. I want to make sure that I don't have any of that O-ring popping out because, of course, that's going to ruin the water resistance rating. Okay, and we'll put in our screws. Make sure we're still in focus here. Camera looks a little funky today. I think it's because I'm working on a white background, so it's really throwing the camera off. So apologize for the brightness of the video, but it's just messy, so I got to work over that white chuck. Okay, so we got our screws in. Go ahead and screw them in. And the links for, you know, as many of the parts as I can remember that I'm using, like the air blaster, the oil, all that stuff, I'm going to go ahead. The watch, I'll put that in the description for you guys. Okay, now, so that's pretty good. Hands are a little slippery here. Let's make sure we're really tight. Now, don't over tighten these screws because even though the screws are metal, I believe, the threads that they're going into are made out of resin, which is what the material of the case is. So they're easy to strip if you do that too hard. Okay, so that's good. So we'll take out our watch. Okay, now if you have any other extra fluid in here, which I don't really have too much to use, go ahead and, you know, take that up in your syringe and put it back in your bottle. Of course, just make sure that your case is clean to begin with because you don't want to be using dirty oil in your mod. Okay, so we'll set that guy to the side. Now we're going to take this over and I'm going to go ahead and rinse this. So when it comes to rinsing, a couple of things. Number one, you obviously don't want to really use something very abrasive. It's probably just good enough to get some dish soap and use your hands and just get this thing really wet first. Try to rinse off as much of the oil as possible and then go ahead and get some soap and water on there and just rinse it. Now, as you're rinsing it, you're obviously going to be touching these buttons as much as you can. You really don't want to be pushing buttons on this watch. There are rubber O-rings inside each of these buttons or pushers, but there's always the increased risk of opening up an area when you push down on it for water to go into. So rather than take that risk, whenever you're washing this, or if this is being used in the pool, if it's a rainy day, you want to avoid pushing these buttons. And as a side note, for those watches that have that little crown that you pull out to adjust the date and the time, you also don't want to do that in a wet environment as well. So I'm going to go ahead and rinse this just using dial soap, dish soap, and my hands, and we'll be back. All right, so we got this all rinsed up. So the good thing about having this chuck here is we can just kind of fold all this oily stuff away, and we can rinse that off later. So very easy to clean with. Put this to the side for now. Then we'll take a clean towel here to wipe this off with. Go, nice microfiber towel. And then we'll just lightly dab this. Now, a couple things while I'm drying this off. The oil, a lot of people obviously are going to wash your hands. You're going to get all that oil off, but they forget to really wash every part of their hand. And then they clean the watch and then they say, God, it's still oily. How is this happening? So a lot of times if you have like oil that's stuck here between the crevices of your fingers, really get the dish soap in there and make sure your hands are clean before you're done washing this watch, because oil is, pretty viscous and takes a little bit longer to remove. The oil also, for some reason, likes to kind of not trap itself, but kind of hide right here between this fake bezel and the case. So, if you're using a, very soft sponge, you kind of want to focus right here, or maybe with your nail, to getting the soap in there and really kind of scrubbing that area around to make sure that you don't have any residual oil, because once you're done and you kind of put this watch back on the case, you'll kind of notice oil appear, and that's kind of like over time the oil just kind of collects downward. So try to get it off in the rinse. So here we are, we're just drying this off. Very easy to use, the microfiber towel. Okay, I think that's pretty good. Now for the screen, you'll notice I didn't really use this too much. I didn't really use a wiping motion for the top, and that's because this glass is just so sensitive. It's so easy to scratch. So that's where I'm going to really be using a really fine or proper microfiber cloth, not even a towel, but a cloth, a clean one, because that's just much more delicate at working there. Okay, then what I like to do, you can kind of see it, or maybe you can't. It's a little bit shinier, like right here and right here and right here. Okay, those are like little water droplets that have kind of collected. So I take these like Q-tips and I just kind of go around between the glass and the fake bezel. Just kind of drag this around just to make sure I get all of that off. Because if that's any oil, that's going to be so easy to streak across the display. Not a big deal, you can wash it off, but you might as well just get it off now as much as you can. Okay, if you have one of those computer air blasters, those work really well too. I have this one, so I'm also gonna, see that? Lots of water coming off. Kind of like air drying at the car wash. This will wipe down again. Okay, I think that's good enough. There might still be a little bit of water that comes out later, but it's all right. We can deal with that later. That's not really going to affect the inside of the watch because that's sealed up. Okay, so got this done, and let's go ahead and take a look at our work. So what I would recommend you do is go to the beginning of the video, take a, actually, you know what? You don't even have to do that. Well, yeah, you do. So go to the beginning of the video, see how this watch looked without any oil in it. Obviously, it had a different display. It was at negative, so it's going to look obviously different just by the negative display and the masking, but you can really see just how well this thing pops now. Just very, very black on the negative display. The letters are really nice, crisp, and gold. Okay, and let's go to our main time here. Okay, and then you can see here just that printed text at the top of the masking, the Casio, the WR100, start, light, all that stuff looks just really, really good. Those things, those letters kind of pop up to the surface. You'll notice that the main time display doesn't really pop up as much as you do on an analog clock when you do a Hydromod, but the masking, the piece of plastic, usually looks like it sits lower in the watch, but this looks like this masking with the 3 yellow subdials is pressed up even higher just below the glass, and that's just due to the light refraction on the oil, which is just a cool effect. So we can go ahead and take a look at our functions here. So bottom right, top left. Okay, that works. Mode on the top, bottom left. And then let's do our backlight here. The backlight is clear for me right now, but for some reason the camera always has a hard time picking this up. So let me, there we go. So backlight still works. It doesn't look any dimmer than it did before. Okay. So still very clear and everything is still working over there. All right, so that looks pretty good. Let's throw this on the bracelet. I wonder if I have a spare Casio bracelet. Nah, I don't have one on me, so we'll just use the original. I have a bunch of these ones, and I've already sized the other ones. So I thought it would just be nice to use one that was already sized. So to do your bracelet here, you're going to orient the watch this way and the bracelet this way. You'll notice the way Casio is oriented. Okay, then you'll flip this guy over. Just put this on a microfiber, and then take your 18mm spring bar. Push in on that spring bar, give it a little jiggle to make sure that it's secure, and then repeat for the other side. This bracelet, by the way, it can be sized, and I do have a separate video, so just type in or look in my channel or search on YouTube for Casio World Time sizing bracelet instructions, and I've got a tutorial up there to show you how to do that. Okay, give it a jiggle again, and I won't be able to give you too much of a wrist shot because this is pretty big, but give a try here. This is just the factory bracelet. So I'll pull it down here, and that way you can kind of see how it looks tight. It's on my 6 3/4 inch wrist. Yeah, so just a really fun, really crisp display. Okay, and there you go. Oh, one other thing to note, just because I found out on my other watch, because you have fluid in here and because there's a little bit of flex on this, fake glass, it's more like a resin. If you accidentally push on the face of this really hard for some reason, or if it like touches like a platform or something for some reason, that pressure is going to push on the glass, and the glass is going to push on the fluid, and then of course that fluid is going to be pushing on the display. And anytime you push on a digital display for this watch, it kind of messes up the numbers. In fact, you'll get a lot of yellow characters and graphics like going all over the place on the screen when you push that. That will go away over time, so don't worry about that. As long as you don't consistently push it, you can just leave the watch alone, come back, within, I don't know if it's a few minutes or a few hours, and the normal time will come back and show itself. I think that's to a point. Obviously, if you put way too much pressure, you may have to hard reset the display, which means opening up the case back. So hopefully you don't have to worry about that. But a few like of these yellow, characters that kind of pop up all over the place and make the display look messy, that will go away over time. So just set it and leave it be. If you have any air bubbles that kind of show up, that definitely is possible. I actually have one that just showed up today on my green one. This has been going well for 2 days now. And this is the watch I accidentally pushed on. And after I pushed on it, the display had all those messy characters. The messy characters went away, but an air bubble came out. And I think that's because there was an air bubble trapped behind the module, and it just decided to appear itself when I push down. So when you have this, you'll just have to repeat this whole video, but instead of using as much oil as we did before, you're just gonna use a little bit less. You'll have to remove the module, you'll have to remove the masking, and then just top off the oil and reinsert everything. Not too difficult with this watch, but just something to be aware of, that it does happen. Some people like the air bubble. They think it looks kind of cool. Some people think it's actually functional because it gives room for the oil to expand when the oil gets heated, which is definitely true. I have noticed that on my blue Casio Duro that has a Hydromod, it has a very, very small air bubble, probably the size of one of the indices. And when I wear the watch, the air bubble disappears after maybe 30 minutes. And that's just because the heat from my wrist heats up the case, that heats up the liquid expands, and then that air bubble disappears. So, you know, that's up to you if you want to keep it or not. So just something to be aware of. All right, guys, so that'll do it for today's video. Hope you found this helpful. I've only done maybe 2 or 3 of these Hydromods on the Casio Duros, so any other tips or tricks, I would definitely look forward to if you could put that in the comments. And if you could subscribe to this channel as well as my Instagram in the description below, that would be greatly appreciated. And as always, have fun, and I'll see you guys on the next one.